Okay, let's begin. Again, this is the week that you should be going to your discussion sections, even if you're waitlisted. If you're waitlisted for the course, go to the discussion section for which you're waitlisted. We'll do our best to let you in. There are still some seats available. If for any reason you didn't get a syllabus first day of class, or for that matter last Monday, there are some up here for the taking. There's also one on the course website. And I assume you all got the announcement that I sent around via email, the DSpace announcement about the error in the syllabus. The deadline for the posting number 1 is Sunday, not Saturday. Sunday at midnight. Thank you, Chloe. All right, let's pick up more or less where we left off. The last couple of slides on Monday went by kind of fast, but what we were doing was unpacking Lewin's grand truism that behavior is a function of both factors that are internal to the person and factors that reside in the environment outside the person. And through most of the history of personality and social psychology, these personal and environmental determinants of behavior have been thought of as independent, so that personality psychologists tended to emphasize internal determinants like traits and motives and attitudes, and basically ignored the social environment. Social psychologists focused on the social environment and basically ignored individual differences. But that was never what Lewin had in mind. Lewin was very clear right from the beginning that that personal and environmental determinants of behavior are not independent. Rather, they're interdependent. They relate to each other. They're each bound up with the other one. And that idea is expressed best, I think, in this doctrine of interactionism that comes to us from Kenneth Bowers, that basically says that people have an effect on the situations to which they respond. So Bowers agreed that behavior was a function of the environment, but he also insisted that the environment was to some extent a function of the person. And the idea that persons shape the environments to which they respond is the general idea behind the doctrine of interactionism. And we talked last time very briefly about exactly how it is that people are supposed to shape the environments to which they respond. And there are basically 4 mechanisms by which that occurs. Evocation, selection, and behavioral manipulation all involve changes in the objective environment. Okay? So in evocation, the person, just by virtue of being in the environment, or by virtue of something about his or her physical appearance, changes the environment. The best example of that I can think of is the matter of gender. The moment you come out of the womb, somebody identifies you as a boy, little boy, or a little girl based on the appearance of your external genitalia. Let's just be blunt about it. And from that moment on, the environment is structured in such a way as to raise a healthy, normal little girl or a healthy, normal little boy, whatever that means to the culture and to the family. But the fact of the matter is that kid hasn't done anything yet. It's just there, right? But the presence and the physical appearance of the child has evoked behavior from other people that changes the environment for that child. That's what evocation is all about. Later on, you start to behave and you start selecting your environment for yourself. You choose to put yourself in one environment as opposed to another. Now, there are limits to the choices we have. Sometimes we're thrust into an environment, or an environment is imposed on us. But even then, we can change that environment through our behavior, through our overt behavior, do something that changes the that changes the environment from one kind of environment to another. All of these mechanisms, these first 3 mechanisms, evocation, selection, and behavioral manipulation, change the objective environment. They change the environment for everybody. If you're born a little girl, you're raised in an environment that's got lots of little girl things in it. Everybody's living in that environment. Okay. If you put a lampshade on your head and start dancing on a coffee table at a boring party, you all of a sudden change that party for everybody. But the third mechanism is the one that we're most interested in this course, and that is changing the environment through cognitive transformation, changing your perception of the environment, your interpretation of what's going on, the meaning of the environment for you. And that is a purely private thing, at least at the outset. I can think what I want about the environment I'm in right now, and you have no idea. Okay? In fact, I like it, but the fact is you really don't know what's going through my head. Through these processes of cognitive transformation, the person changes his or her mental representation of the environment, changes his or her perception of the environment. Now, as we'll see in a couple of minutes, those changes in perception are going to have behavioral consequences, typically. Okay? So the way I think about the environment I'm in is going to change how I behave in the environment. How I behave in the environment is going to change the environment for everybody. If I hate this course and hate this lecture room, which I don't, and I don't, but if I did, I could make your lives quite miserable for the next 48 minutes, much more miserable than they have any right to be. But the beginning of it comes from my mental representation of the world in which I'm in. Yes, quick question. Well, by evocation, I just mean the mere presence of the person is there. Hasn't done anything yet. Think about the example of a baby right out of the womb, okay? That baby has not done anything and may not even have cried yet. It just is a little girl or a little boy. And what happens is immediately, still these days, the hospital staff will put a pink baby blanket and a little pink ski cap on a little girl and a blue baby blanket and a little blue ski cap on a baby boy. That's what they do. The environment is immediately responding to that child, but the child hasn't done anything, okay? That's evocation. And there are lots of other examples I can give. I talk about this a little bit more in the lecture supplements, but that is the clearest example that we can give. By behavioral manipulation, we mean you actually do something. Suppose I stood up here and read from my prepared script, kind of, sort of like this all the time. You would not be happy campers, and none of you would be happy campers, because my behavior is making the environment unbearable for you, okay? I've gone way beyond evocation, okay? I'm doing something overtly that changes the environment and changes the environment for everybody. That's the difference. Okay, yes, quick. We're gonna talk about it right now as if it's a conscious, deliberate act. Okay. Later on in the course, we'll talk about unconscious changes in mental representation. But even those transformations will have conscious consequences. Okay. So I might unconsciously harbor some kind of stereotype about somebody, right? But eventually that's going to percolate to the surface and become a conscious change later. Okay. So anyway, that's basically where we are with this. And then we wanted to complicate this just a little bit further with this further doctrine of reciprocal determinism that comes from Al Bandura down in Stanford, who pointed out that in most explanations of behavior, if you will, the direction of causation is unidirectional, from the person to behavior, from the environment to behavior, from the person to the environment. But what Bandura pointed out was that if you really look at how the social world works, there's a dynamic interplay among these 3 elements: behavior, the person, the environment, each of which is serving as both a cause of and an effect of each of the others. That's what we mean by the doctrine of reciprocal determinism. So people may engage in various kinds of behavior, but that behavior is also going to feed back and may have the effect of changing the person who emitted that behavior. The environment may elicit some behavior, but that behavior also may feed back to change the environment in various ways, and the person may change the environment through evocation, selection, behavioral manipulation, and cognitive transformation, but that environment is also going to have a reciprocal effect on the person. So here you've got a dynamic system where causality is going in both directions, not necessarily simultaneously, not necessarily of the same strength in both directions, but still there are these feedback relations that you really can't get away from. Okay, so that's the general idea, and I know I went by that kind of fast last time. The basic idea here, again, we're talking about the cognitive perspective on social interaction, is that there's a difference between the objective environment and the subjective environment. The objective environment is what it is for everybody. It's public. It's what everybody sees, and it's the kind of thing that people can manipulate in various ways. The subjective environment is the product of cognitive transformations, changing the way you perceive an environment, you think about the environment, you categorize the environment, or whatever, and it's this mental representation of the situation that leads to behavior. It's not the objective environment, it's the subjective environment that causes people to respond the way they do, and it's this distinction between the objective and the subjective environment that is critical to understanding social interaction from the subject's point of view. Now, this idea is really very old. It goes back to the 1920s. It was first articulated by a sociologist named Thomas, actually a husband and wife pair of sociologists, Thomas and Thomas, and it's so famous it's got a name. It's called the Thomas theorem, which basically says there's always a stage in which we call the definition of the situation. If men, by which he means people, if men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. The situation doesn't matter, according to the Thomas theorem. It's the definition of the situation that matters. That's something that goes on in its head. The great Robert K. Merton, the great sociologist and historian of science, has characterized this as the single most consequential sentence ever put in print by an American sociologist, and it probably is, because it's foundational to the cognitive approach to various kinds of social sciences. Moving into the 30s and later, we get a movement in social psychology and sociology called symbolic interactionism, a movement initiated by a sociologist, George Herbert Mead, and continued by a sociologist at Herbert Bloomer, who was in fact the founder of the sociology department here at UC Berkeley. A very famous sociologist, brought here to establish sociology as a discipline. But the fundamental statement of symbolic interactionism is this quote from Mead: "Human beings act towards things on the basis of the meaning that the things have for them." Okay, so it's the meaning of the event, it's the meaning of the situation, not the situation as it would be objectively described. And then he went on to talk about human being as both it is an object to himself. That's what we talked about 2 times ago when we talked about this interesting feature of social cognition, that it breaks down the subject-object barrier. But the reason symbolic interactionism gets its name is that these interactions are symbolic because social interactions are symbolic because they take place in the person's head, in the person's mind, before they occur in reality. That's what symbolic interactionism is all about. So now let's take apart a very simple social interaction and see how the meaning of the interaction, broadly construed to include the person's perception of the situation, the person's memories about previous situations, the person's thoughts and interpretations, guide what the person does in that situation. We're going to unpack what's known as the general social interaction cycle. This is a framework for analyzing any social interaction, but it's most easily applied, most easily understood if you think about it in terms of what's known as a dyadic interaction, D-Y-A-D-I-C, dyadic interaction, because it just takes place between 2 people. What we're going to do is we're going to arbitrarily designate one of these 2 people as the actor, and the other, what happened to my, there we go, we're going to arbitrarily assign one of these individuals the role of actor, and we're going to call that person the actor because he or she actually initiates the social interaction. And the other person is the target, the object of the actor's action. But as you will see very quickly, the actor and the target reverse roles. So that initially the target is the target of the actor's action, but pretty quickly the actor becomes the target of the actor's action, and so on and so forth. And again, this is a framework for analyzing dyadic social interactions, but if you think about it for a second, you could expand this to almost any kind of social interaction, between the individual and a group of people, between 2 groups of people, whatever. But we're going to try to keep it simple and just talk about the dyad for a moment. So let's see what happens here. That's the social interaction. You've got an actor doing things in blue, and you've got a target of the interaction doing things in red, and let's see what happens. The first thing that happens is that the actor enters the situation, chooses, if you will, to enter some particular situation. And people almost never enter situations completely cold. They always have some goal in mind. They usually have some fund of knowledge that's relevant to the interaction. Some of that is kind of generic knowledge about what the social world is like, and some of it is particular knowledge about exactly what you're going to encounter in the situation. And you also carry with you into the situation a repertoire of skills, both motoric skills and cognitive skills that you're going to use in the course of this interaction. So let's say the actor is a woman, and let's say the target is a man, and let's say that the actor has the idea in her head that she's going to ask the target for a date for Friday night. Okay, fairly straightforward interaction, the kind of thing that lots of people do. So now she's walking across campus, and she sees this guy coming toward her. She kind of veers in his direction, so she runs into him, and then what she's going to do, she veers in his direction to run into him because she has it in mind that she's going to ask him for a date. Okay, so what do you have to know if you're going to do that? You're going to just ask a random person you see on the street for a date? What are you going to do? Well, you've got to know something about him, right? You want to know if he's single. You want to know if you know his first name. You want to know if there's any reason to think he might have any interest in you at all. There's all sorts of things. But you wouldn't be veering towards the guy if you didn't have some of that, right? But still, it's part of your mental representation of the situation. Oh, there's that guy. I always wanted to get to know him better. You know, maybe you never asked me for anything now, and maybe I'll just ask him out for a date. Okay, so you also got to have something in mind. If you're going to ask somebody out for a date, you got to have something to do. You go to the movies, you go to a cafe, you got to do something. So you got to know what movies are in town. That's kind of generic social knowledge. But you've also got to have some skills. For one thing, you've got to know how to initiate a conversation, right? Which is not a trivial thing to know. And you also have to know how to bring the conversation around to the subject of Friday night. Okay, and you've got to have some motoric skills too. You can't stand too close to the person. Okay, that could be off-putting. You can't run up and give them a big kiss. By the same token, you can't kind of stand on the other side of campus and shout at him, "Hey, I want to go out Friday night." You've got to have that some kind of social skill about how to behave motorically in the presence of such a person. Okay, so the actor that has entered the situation, and that's basically what goes on here, but now she's got to form a more specific impression of the situation. As she approaches him, does he acknowledge her? Does he smile? Does he speed up? Does he turn and walk the other way? All sorts of behaviors now are flowing into her, all sorts of information is flowing into her that is going to help her figure out what's going on. Once she's entered the situation, she has to form an impression. First, she has to form an impression of the entire situation that she's in. Is he with a whole bunch of other people? Because then it could be awkward, right? Or whatever. Some of this information that guides her impression is going to be extracted from the stimulus, from his behavior as she approaches him. Other information is going to be extracted from memory. Last time I saw this guy, he kind of smiled at me. It's kind of a nice smile. This time he's not smiling. Maybe it's a bad time or whatever. But whatever her impression is, it's going to determine what action she is going to take. So the actor enters the situation, forms an impression of the situation, and let's just assume that all the signs are favorable. So what she does is she goes ahead and eventually she acts. She says, you doing anything Friday night? You want to go out? You want to go to a movie? Philomena's in town. Let's go watch that. And so now what happens? Okay. Now the action is transferred to the target. He's just been walking across campus, right? And now he's in an entirely different situation, a situation that he did not necessarily choose, except by virtue of walking towards her instead of running in the other direction. But what he has to do now is interpret her action. He has to figure what's going on. Okay, gee, I've never been asked out by a woman before. I've always been the one who does the initiating. I'm not quite sure what to do. He has to look at her demeanor, her behavior, form an impression of her. And of course, what's happened is by virtue of approaching him and asking him out for a date, she's changed the situation for him. It's not the same situation that he was in before, and he has to figure out what to do. Well, let's just assume for a second that actually he's busy Friday night, okay? That he's already got a date for Friday night, but he happens to be free on Saturday night. So he says, well, I kind of got something to do on Friday night, but how about Saturday night? Why about Saturday night, okay? So that's his response. I'm busy Friday night. How about going out Saturday night? And now she has to figure out what's going on with him. What's he doing Friday night, okay? There's another woman, right? And all of that. Now, the interesting thing is she's free Saturday night, okay? As well as Friday night. She's already told him she's free Friday night. If she says, yeah, I can go out with you Saturday night, what has she told him? She doesn't have anything to do this weekend, right? And that's not necessarily information that she wants him to have, right? So now she's got to figure out whether she's going to say, Saturday's bad for me, so maybe some other time, get out of the situation somehow. They're thinking all the time. Each of them is trying to figure out what to do. Each of them is trying to figure out what the other one is trying to figure out and what to do. Okay, so in fact, what happens is now she has to interpret his response, and the cycle starts up all over again. She's now in a different situation than she thought she was in before. Before, she thought she was the actor, right? Now she's been put in the position of trying to respond to him, and she's got to figure out, okay, now do I really want to go out with somebody who's already seeing somebody else, right? Well, suppose she takes a chance, and she says, yes, okay? So now, having altered her impression of the situation, she now acts again accordingly, and she says, yeah, I'll go out Saturday night. Saturday night's fine, okay? Now, the ball's back in the target's court. He's got, now he's got a date for Friday night with Susie, and he's got a date for Saturday night with Shirley. Now he's got to figure out how to manage two women. Okay, which is something he may not have had to figure out before. What if he goes out with Susie on Friday night? She says, "Want to go out again tomorrow night?" Okay, he's got to say, "No, I got to stay with Shirley." He's got to figure all this kind of stuff out. He's got to respond, and the whole thing continues with the action passing back and forth between the actor and the target until one of them breaks off the conversation with, "Okay, I'll see you about 7 o'clock Saturday night. All right, I'll pick you up." Okay, the whole interaction is determined by the impressions that each of these individuals has of the situation, the impressions that each of these individuals have of each other, the knowledge that each of them has of themselves, and by virtue of this dynamic interplay where, well, at one moment you're the actor, at the next moment you're the target of somebody else's action, this reciprocal determinism, the whole thing takes on this very interesting dynamic, but all of it is cognitively mediated. All of it is mediated by knowledge, beliefs, expectations, perceptions, memories, thoughts, solving problems, all that kind of stuff is coming to the fore. Okay, so that's the general idea behind the cognitive mediation of social interaction as it's illustrated in the general social interaction cycle. Yeah. No, that's right. That's exactly right. They switch roles. And they're going to continue switching roles. So now she's got to figure out what to do. She's like, okay, I'll do Saturday. All right. Now it's back to him, right? That's exactly right. So that's how these kinds of interactions, whether it's kind of mundane interaction, kind of asking somebody for a date on Saturday night, or for that matter, something monumental. I mean, you don't get to see this in real life too often, but think about all the movies and the television shows in which you watch somebody propose marriage. Okay, there you go. Okay, is she interested? Will she say no? What happens if she does say no? And all sorts of stuff like that. It's all, it's all more interesting than buying toothpaste. But even buying toothpaste at your local drugstore has this kind of quality to it. All interactions have this kind of quality to them. They're cognitively mediated by people's beliefs and goals and expectations and knowledge. Okay, anything further about this for now? All right, there we go. Target must respond. Took me away here. And okay, so now just to kind of make this point, there's a cycle that goes on between the two participants in the social interaction, but there's a cycle that also goes on within each of these participants. They themselves are changed by what they think and by what they do. So, for example, she now knows that she's capable of asking somebody out on a date. Maybe that's something she never thought she was capable of doing before, but now she knows she can do it, okay? And having successfully, more or less, navigated